Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris and you're watching Consider This. Tonight on the show I have Professor Sabina Alkire, who is the Director of the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, or better known as OPHI, in the University of Oxford. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure. So Professor Sabina is perhaps best known for developing, along with James Foster, the Alkire-Foster Method for measuring multidimensional poverty. So this was also developed for the UNDP's Human Development Report, and today that's a topic we're going to be discussing. We're going to be looking at the measurement of poverty. Poverty has traditionally been measured using a poverty line, and we want to ask Professor Sabina today to talk to us a bit about that. So are there benefits to using a monetary measure in terms of looking at addressing poverty in a country?
A monetary measure.
Using the poverty line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you still see that it's relevant today?
Yeah, okay. we need to know about money because money buys many discretionary things. We want to give somebody a gift. We want to buy a bit of lipstick. You know, it's important to have freedom. It's important to be able to express, and there are many things that money can buy, and poor people can just address it within their own households without services or external supports. So monetary poverty remains fundamentally important, but insufficient. Okay. Well,
talk to me about the insufficiencies, because there are drawbacks to just using a poverty line. We've seen that in Malaysia as well, when the UN Special Rapporteur for Extreme Poverty had a visit and made the observation that Malaysia's poverty line does not reflect the situation on the ground.
Yeah. So I'm an economist, and I was trained that money is a good proxy for malnutrition. It's a good proxy for children out of school. It's a good proxy for lack of good housing. But now we have microdata that we didn't in the 1990s or whatever. And now we can see much more precisely the mismatch. And it's not only in developing countries or upper, developing countries like Malaysia, but it's also in Europe. So just to give an example, in Europe, there's a mismatch between people who are monetary poor, people experiencing quasi-joblessness, and people who are materially deprived in the sense that they might not have 2 pairs of shoes, they might not have opportunity to eat meat, fish, or the vegetarian equivalent twice a week, they might not have a holiday, they might not be able to heat their houses. And this is a surprise because it's things money can buy. But what we find all over Europe is that there's a mismatch. And so now Europe measures all of them. It measures joblessness, at risk of monetary poverty, and material deprivation together. And it does so to bring into view deprivations that poor people are experiencing. And that's also the case if we think of health and education. One of the big surprises is that monetary poverty, even by a food basket, is not a good predictor of malnutrition in the household. Now, is that because of intra-household inequalities? Is that because of a lack of knowledge of how to spend the money? Is it because we have different metabolic needs? There are many complexities. Okay. But just knowing we have enough money to eat doesn't mean we do eat.
So these deprivation profiles, they seem to be unique to the individual. So, I mean, how do you measure? Could you talk to me a little bit more about the, measuring deprivation? Yeah. So you have different categories, yes.
Yeah, I mean, when people hear the word multidimensional, 6 syllables, it's really long, really complicated. But actually, it's simpler than monetary poverty. So basically, you think of what are the key deprivations. Now, Malaysia, that conversation is ongoing. With UNDP, we do a global MPI. And there are 3 dimensions: health, education, and living standard. And there are 10 indicators. So are you deprived? 1, do you have a malnourished person in your household who's stunted or underweight as a child, who has a low body mass index as an adult? That's your first deprivation. You can say yes or no.
Right.
Second, very sadly, has a child died in the last 5 years? You know that, yes or no. Thirdly, does anybody in your household have 6 years of schooling so they can read for the other members of the household? Could be a child 11 years of age, could be grandma. If you do, you're not deprived. But if nobody in the household has 6 years, you are.
Okay.
Is a child not attending school from ages 6 to 14? If so, you're deprived. If not, you're not deprived. Do you have clean water? Yes or no. Adequate sanitation? Yes or no. Electricity? Yes or no. A good quality house? Yes or no. assets, clean energy. So you can make for yourself, and we make, using household survey for each person, a deprivation profile of yes or no, are we deprived in each of these 10 indicators.
Okay.
But one deprivation isn't poverty. Because I might have a low body mass index, you might,
right,
because you're a fashion model. So you might need it as part of your job. Or somebody might have no years of schooling, but they're a multimillionaire.
Right.
And so we only identify a person as poor if they have a critical mass of deprivations at the same time. In the global MPI, they're deprived in 1/3 of the weighted indicators.
Oh, so 1/3 would mean they have fallen under the category of deprived.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then when we do that, then it becomes simple. Because you can say, okay, what percentage of people in my country are poor? Which means what percentage of people are deprived in more than 1/3 of these indicators? And then you can do that. And then, well, what percentage of indicators on average are they deprived in? We call that intensity, because more is worse.
Right.
So it's worse if I'm deprived in 90% than in 34%. But either case, I'm poor. So we also then look at intensity. And then the MPI is something I think a third grader could do, because you multiply the percentage of people who are poor times the average percentage of deprivations poor people explain. So it just requires multiplication.
Okay.
And then you get the MPI.
Are you able to calculate this for the world? I mean, different countries. I mean, based on the criteria that you talked about, were you able to put a number to how many people fall within the different deprivations?
Yes, with UNDP, we estimate this now for 5.7 billion people, 101 countries.
Okay.
Very sadly, Malaysia is not among them. But of those 5.7 billion people, 1.3 billion, which is 23% of people in the developing world, are multidimensionally poor.
1.3 billion people
Yeah.
are multidimensionally poor.
Yeah, so they're deprived in more than 1/3 of those 10 weighted indicators.
And are they spread equally throughout the world? Are they concentrated on different continents?
Yeah, most of them live in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. So poverty levels are highest in Sub-Saharan Africa, where 57% of people are poor. In South Asia, it's 31%, but South Asia has more people. So it has roughly the same number of poor people, very sadly. In East Asia Pacific, where we are in Malaysia, on average, 5.6% of people are poor. We cover 2 billion people in East Asia. And it ranges from less than 1% in Thailand to 46% in East Timor.
Wow. Okay, so there are huge disparities in this. I think we'll come back and discuss a little bit more how the multidimensional poverty index will change the way policymakers respond to poverty. That's coming up next on Consider This. Stay with us.